In today's show, Donovan Clingan gets a little recognition in the annual NBA GM survey. Plus, of course, Deni Avdija could be the Blazers' best player. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making the show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen and tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, I want to talk about Donovan Clingan, whose name pops up a couple times in the annual GM survey by John Schumann of NBA.com. An interesting look at kind of the groupthink that goes on in NBA front offices this time of year. And Clingan gets a very minor amount of love in a survey that did not include much Blazer action. Plus, a stupid non-controversy involving Deni Avdija being the Blazers' best player. Let me just say this. Of course, Deni Avdija could be the Blazers' best player. Of course he could. It doesn't mean that he is, but of course he could be. We'll talk about that stupid non-controversy in the second segment. Plus, I have some thoughts about what's more important than being the best player on this roster. We'll do that to close the show. Let's start with the NBA GM survey. I enjoy this every year. I don't always share it on the show because I do think it's a little bit... it's often such weirdo groupthink that I don't know how much NBA GMs actually put stock into it. Like, I do not know how serious GMs take it. I should have asked last time I saw him. I should have asked Joe Cronin how serious he takes this, but I forgot about it. Like, did they just hand this off to someone else in the office? Does someone weigh down? Does like a video coordinator do this and they fill it out for the NBA GM? But and they put the NBA GM's name on it. But every year, the John Schumann of NBA.com writes these GM surveys, and they ask who's the best team? What's the most surprising move? Who's the best leader? Who's the player you'd like to build around? Who's going to be the best player in the league in 5 years? What was the move that surprised you the most? What was the best move that anyone made this offseason? Who's the best rookie and all of those things? And I think it's an interesting snapshot, like heading into the season of kind of what GMs think. But I think it's a lot of, like, I think the most interesting part of it is how much bizarro consensus there is on stuff that's just like, it seems that there's not that many NBA GMs or whoever is filling out these surveys on behalf of the NBA GM. Not that many people who are like really thinking outside the bun. It seems like everybody, they seem like very predictable answers in some ways. And in some ways, I think that is more telling how chalk everybody goes, right? So the Blazers don't show up in this survey very much. They're one of the bad teams in the league. It's just like they're not going to, when you like pick the top 8 teams or whatever it is, or pick the teams that are going to finish in the top 4 in each conference. Now, unsurprisingly, the Blazers aren't involved, right? I think some of the places where the Blazers didn't, most underrated move of the offseason. I'm surprised Deni Avdija didn't get votes. But again, like, Deni Avdija is not going to help the Blazers win that many games because they're not interested in winning that many games. He's a good player. It might end up being a valuable move down the line, and you'll look back and say, that was a nice little trade. But I'm not surprised that he didn't show up there because, like, underrated moves are like the Alex Caruso. I think that's like, it's so underrated, it's obviously overrated type of thing. The Najee Marshall of trades. The Blazers aren't going to end up on this particular list this particular survey often because they're in the bottom of the league. But Donovan Clingan shows up a couple times, and I think it's telling. The first place where you see Clingan's name is which rookie will be the best player in 5 years. Reed Sheppard from the number 3 overall pick went to the Houston Rockets, 43% of the votes. Like, everybody thinks Reed Sheppard's going to be good. Right now, everyone thinks Reed Sheppard is that dude. Is it because that he looked good in Summer League and Risa Shea and Alex Sarr looked bad? Yes, that's exactly why, right? That's exactly why. Also, he's like the number 3 pick. That's not that crazy. Stephen Castle is 2, Zachary Risa Shea 3, tied for 4th, Bub Carrington and Alex Sarr. Telling that Alex Sarr and Carrington received the same number of votes, and Carrington was taken freaking 12 picks later at 14. And then in the also receiving votes category, Matas Buzelis of the Chicago Bulls, Ron Holland of the Detroit Pistons, Dalton Knecht of the Los Angeles Lakers, and Donovan Clingan. I'd be pretty surprised if Knecht is the best player in his rookie class in 5 years, but maybe. I think he's going to be a pretty good NBA player. It's maybe fine. Donovan Clingan also in the also receiving votes category. It appears that the receiving votes category is alphabetical by last name. In this particular one, sometimes they show the other votes. But I think that's good news for Clingan. I think his role is going to be, it's a relatively limited role this year. But for me, I think Donovan Clingan has a pretty narrow path to being good, right? Like, I don't think he's ever going to be this like elite offensive force in the league, but he can pass. That'll help. He's probably reportedly, at least according to DeAndre Ayton, a good offensive rebounder. That'll help him in the league. Easy buckets, offensive rebounding. And he's really, really big and understands what it means to be really, really big and has good defensive instincts. Slow feet, fast brain. And that fast processing is going to help him be a good defender. Like, I think his path to being like an impactful, positive NBA player is very, very clean, right? Just do what you do well. And if you add anything else to what your like already sort of obvious skills are, you're going to be pretty good. I think Clingan is, I don't know about best player in the rookie class or whatever in 5 years, but I think he has a path to being I think he has a clean path to being an impactful and positively impactful NBA player. The other place where Donovan Clingan's name shows up, which rookie was the biggest steal at where he was drafted in the NBA draft? Everybody tied for first. There were 10% of the vote went to 6 guys. Bub Carrington, who went 14. Devin Carter, who went 13 to the Kings. John Furphy, 35 to the Pacers. Dalton Knecht, who went 17 to the Lakers. Terrence Shannon Jr., 27 to the T-Wolves. Nikola Topic, who went 12 to Oklahoma City. For what it's worth, I think he'd be my pick. Matas Buzelis, 11. Those are the guys all tied for first, and then tied for 7th after those 6 names. Matas Buzelis and Clingan both received 7% of the vote. They're tied for 7th. Matas Buzelis went 11 to Chicago, and obviously Clingan 7 to Portland. Other players receiving votes: Cam Christie to the Clippers, Isaiah Collier to the Jazz. Collier's looked pretty good in preseason. One preseason game that I watched part of. Zach Edey to Memphis, Kyle Filipowski to Utah, Jared McCain to Philly, Baylor Shireman to Boston at 30, and Reed Sheppard at 3. If Reed Sheppard is the biggest steal at 3, he had that's biggest steal. If he's like clearly better than Risa Shea and Sarr, that would be an interesting one for Houston and Cody Williams at 10. Okay, but here's where I want to talk about the group think real quick. Last year, receiving 43% of the vote at this pick was Cam Whitmore. 43% of the vote, because Cam Whitmore was supposed to be a top 10 guy, and then he had maybe some red flag with some back injury stuff. And he was pretty good. I think Cam Whitmore wasn't great his rookie year, but I think he's pretty good. Like, I think when I watched him, I was like, he's maybe like a one-way guy. He's an offensive player, but I think he has some juice on the offensive end, and I think he looked pretty good as a rookie. I'm a believer in him being an impact player in the league. 43% of the vote, because he dropped from, the Blazers worked him out as a consideration at 3, right? Like he was going to be as high as a top 5 pick, an early lottery pick, and he dropped all the way to 20, I believe. So it's like, oh, he was a guy, consensus high pick that dropped. He's gonna be the biggest steal. Was Cam Whitmore the biggest steal? Wasn't it freaking Derek Lively or Brandon Przemski? Like, are we sure that Trace Jackson Davis at 57 or Tamati Kamara at 52 weren't bigger steals in terms of where they were drafted than Cam Whitmore? Like, it's just it's so reactionary. NBA GMs, this is stunning to me how reactionary it is. Like, I'm voting on this thing in October, and I am obviously, like, you don't have the value of hindsight, right? Like in hindsight, you can look back, but it just seems so it just seems so groupthinky on this for last season. I'm interested that this year is not that. It is 6 dudes tied for 10% of the vote, that there is no consensus. It speaks to the sort of the flatness of this particular draft class, and I think that's telling. And obviously Clingan getting votes is good news for the Blazers. Because, yeah, I think Clingan might be, like I said, I think Clingan has an easy path to being good at what he does in the league, like his skills translating to the league, and if he adds other stuff onto that, he could be a special player. But like, if he's just like a dude who sets good screens, passes, and defends, that's like he might be an impactful starter in the league for a long time. And if you draft a guy at 7 who's an impactful starter in the league for a long time, you did a really good job. Obviously, at some point you need to hit a star, but like smoking a double off the wall is also a valuable hit. That's an unnecessary baseball metaphor 10 minutes into this show. What was the most surprising move of the offseason? This is the only place where the Blazers also show up in this one. Deni Avdija in the also receiving votes category. Karl-Anthony Towns, freaking duh, to the Knicks at number 1. Paul George to Philly at 2. DeMar DeRozan to Sacramento 3. Mikal Bridges to New York at 4. Zachary Sachet going number 1 overall at 5. And then Avdija is in the also receiving votes category. Last year it was the freaking Holiday. It was the Dame to Milwaukee trade, the Holiday Lillard trade last season, far and away with 43% of the vote. Yeah, I think I don't know if Deni was the most surprising, but I've said a bunch on the show that I'm not surprised at the price that Washington got, like the package that Washington got for Deni. I'm surprised the Blazers were the one that offered that package. I'm surprised that, considering where the Blazers are in their situation, that was a deal with sending out 2 firsts and Malcolm Brogdon and 2 seconds for Deni Avdija. Not that Avdija won't help, like I'm about to talk about how he might be the best player on the team, but I was surprised the Blazers did it. Like I'm just like, in terms of cycle of the rebuild that they're in, I'm surprised they did it. He belongs there. Clingan is not like way up the list. The Blazers aren't getting a bunch of love, but I think could Donovan Clingan be the best player of his draft class in 5 years? If NBA GMs think he's in the conversation, and is he the biggest steal at his draft slot, and NBA GMs think he's in the conversation, good place to be. The proof will be in the pudding, right? It's pudding season. The pudding is about to happen. We'll see it. We will. I don't think we'll revisit and talk about whether 7% of the NBA GMs got it right, but I think it is, if nothing else, heartening if you're looking for some good news about the Blazers to see him, Donovan Clingan getting a little bit of love. All right, let's talk Deni Avdija. There's a weird aggregation controversy that popped up at Trailblazers practice today. It's deeply unimportant, but I think it's an interesting the controversy itself is unimportant and I dismiss it outright. But the conversation itself, I think, is more interesting to discuss where the Blazers are as a team. Of course, Deni Avdija could be the Blazers' best player. Let's talk about that in the second segment. Join me there, won't you? First, I want to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Therapy can be incredibly valuable no matter what you're going through, whether it's the major traumatic event in your life, or whether it's just the challenges of trying to get through day to day. Therapy is a great tool for facing your fears and developing the tools to help you overcome them. Or if they're not necessarily fears, they're just hurdles or challenges, therapy can be the tool you use, or the strategy you use to develop tools to get where you want to go and grow in the direction you'd like to grow towards. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. And you just fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and then you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right. So I did not attend Blazers practice today. I was driving all over Oregon for work. So I was not in Tualatin. I was cruising the mean streets of Interstate 5 and then Highway 99 and among other places. But at practice today, Chauncey Billups was asked by the reporting cohort that was there about a quote that was circulating the internet of whether he called Deni Avdija the best player on the team, and Billups said that he didn't, and then it was maybe clarified later by one of the reporters in attendance that what Billups said was that during the workouts, Deni Avdija, there had been some days when he was the best player on the court, and then I saw some good sleuthing on Reddit r/RipCity. Shout out to y'all, basically saying like there was a quote earlier in the week, and then it was aggregated by one account, and then misaggregated by another crappy account, and then another crappy account aggregated that, and it's just like bad actors on the internet. Who gives a swear word? Like, who gives a bad word? It's so stupid. I don't know why we're policing this. I don't know why this was a topic of conversation, quite frankly. The interesting thing is Chauncey Billups' response. He said, I didn't say that and I wouldn't say that. Huh. I actually think that's fair, right? I've mentioned on the show, this was a mailbag episode I did about a month ago where a listener asked whether Deni Avdija could be the Blazers' best player. And I said, he absolutely could. For me, it's like, I don't think you can say that right now outright. Like, I think today, if you ask me who the Blazers' best player is, I would say it's Anthony Simons. But I don't feel strongly about that. I don't feel strongly about that at all. Like I think that is a weakly held opinion. Some days I think it's Jeremy Grant. I just think, and I really value what Anthony Simons does on offense. I think he is an advantage creator on offense and commanding double teams and the ability to shoot off the dribble and all those things. His ability on offense is enough higher than all of his teammates that his like very real deficiencies on defense, one of the worst defensive players in the league, aren't as, probably keep him above Jeremy Grant, who I think is like a neutral defender the last 2 seasons. I don't think he's been a very good defensive player in a Blazers uniform. I think he's been kind of meh. He's certainly capable of it. And there's nights when he's clearly the Blazers' best player. But like parsing who the best player is uninteresting. It's uninteresting because the point of this team is like, it's not who the Blazers' best player is in October of 2024. It's like who can be the Blazers' best player moving forward, starting in March of 2025, and then 5 years into the future, 6 years, like for a long time. There's a fairly good chance that neither Simons or Grant are on the roster when they start the season next year. Who cares if they're the best player on the team? That is unimportant. And I'm blown away by this. I am blown away by this. I watched this exchange on the Blazers YouTube channel. Why didn't they ask why didn't the reporters in attendance not ask Chauncey Billups who the best player is? They're doing this controversy reporting about hey, somebody, there's some bad internet aggregating out there. And let me be 100% clear. I am an aggregator. What I do in this podcast is aggregate. I do a little bit of reporting from time to time. I take pride when I'm in person when I go to games and I attend, media events to do the reporting and do the job. I take it seriously. But like, I'm an aggregator, y'all. This is audio aggregation, and it has a video element as well. But like, I know what I am, but I'm careful about trying to do things the right way. I respect the craft. I certainly respect the people who go do this every day. They allow me to do my job as well, right? But like, why didn't they ask Chauncey Billups who the best player on the team is? That's the obvious follow-up. Who's the best player on the team, Chauncey Billups? Who you think it is? Because he said, I wouldn't say that. And here's the thing. I think it's a totally fair of Billups to say, like, to feel uncomfortable when it's like, you said Deni Avdija is the best player on the team. That's an uncomfortable position to be put in if he doesn't think that and he isn't going to trumpet that, right? Because it puts him in a weird position with Jeremy Grant. It puts him in a weird position with Anthony Simons. He puts him in a weird position with DeAndre Ayton to some extent, right? But of course, Deni Avdija could be the best player on the roster. Of course. His mix of skills absolutely could allow him to be the best player on the roster. It might speak to the overall talent level on the Blazers team that Deni Avdija is very, very, very squarely in this conversation, right? But like, he is undeniable. I think he's going to be one of the better, if not the best defender on the roster. He's got some playmaking chops that are going to help. If he figures out how to use his left hand and how to get a mid-range game going on offense, he's really going to open up his offensive skill. If the shooting improvement he showed last year translates, he's going to be a decent offensive player, a really good offensive player in transition. And like, the bar for being the Portland Trailblazers' best player in the year 2024 is relatively low. He could absolutely jump over that bad boy. So why don't he ask Chauncey Billups who it is? I think on any given night, It could be Anthony Simons. It could be Jeremy Grant. It could, of course, be Deni Avdija. I think it could be DeAndre Ayton, but he's going to have to really take a step on defense to get there. His offense kind of is what it is. Like, he's a play finisher. He's not going to be a dude who is a playmaker. You can't really like throw him the ball. He's like, not a great post-up guy. He's fine at it, but not a great post-up guy by any means. That's not his strength on offense. He's a mid-range shooter. He's very, very good at it. But he doesn't put the ball on the floor and doesn't pass. Like, it's hard. It's like, he's really good at what he does, but he doesn't do a lot else. I don't know that he has like on offense a path to being like a ton more than he is, but he might. Maybe he'll surprise us. But like if DeAndre Ayton takes a step to being like a consistently better defensive player, he's obviously in this conversation too, right? And I think that is like the real truth of this roster. It's relatively flat. This is such a non-controversy. Like, policing bad aggregators is just like not something I'm interested in. If you'll notice on the show, like I just ignore this shit. Pardon my language. I just ignore it. Like there's a lot of like bad slop on the internet, and my approach is generally to ignore the nonsense. Like, try to bring more thoughtful conversations to the process, because like what's fun about being a fan of a team is not like wading into the mud and getting messy. It's like thinking, it's like having real thoughts about a team, and hopefully like unique and interesting thoughts about a team. And kind of like, I'm not here to just like debunk bad interneting. I can't believe this was a topic of conversation. There's a reason I didn't lead the show with it. I find it all nonsense. Here's the actually interesting thing. Here's what I find more important than who's the Blazers' best player, because I think that could change night to night. I don't think there's much of a gap between the Blazers' best player that I kind of think is Anthony Simons now, but it's loosely, and it could be any three other dudes on any given night, right? Who is the Blazer that if they hit their ceiling, like reasonable ceiling, who's like the biggest swing player on the Blazers roster? That's an interesting question. Who's the biggest swing player on the Blazers roster? Because who's the best players? And like, who cares? Who cares? They'll play games. Well, you'll see them. And shoot, they may three of the four best players are maybe not part of the long-term plan, right? It just doesn't freaking matter. But who the Blazers like swing player is, like who's the player that like completely changes the trajectory of this whole thing? I think that's interesting. And I got some ideas for who might be the Blazers' biggest swing player. If they were to really hit, how much would it change? Let's talk about big swings in the second segment, or excuse me, to close the show in the third segment. Join me there, won't ya? First, though, I want to tell you about FanDuel. It's America's number one sportsbook, and they're making it more fun during the NFL season. So if you want a big return from America's number one sportsbook, you can get in on the action during the NFL season all season long. We're approaching the midway point. We're kind of passing the quarter pole and beyond here. I guess we're approaching like a third of the way into the season, more accurately. But if you're watching games this weekend, you're listening to Wednesday, October 9th show. And if you're watching Thursday night football, or you're watching games on Sunday or Monday, and you got a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page, where you place your bets on FanDuel. The app is super simple to use, and it's got all of that up-to-the-second information right there at your fingertips, on the same screen, on the same page, where you can make your wagers. And if you're a new user, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet, and that's FanDuel.com. Still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond. You are still listening to Locked On Blazers. I find who the Blazers' best player. I think, like I said, it's pudding season. We'll find out. The proof will come out in the pudding. Like it'll be right there for us. I think it's relatively flat now. Like I said, I don't even have I don't feel strongly about one guy. Like it's either Jeremy or Ant. And on one night, it might obviously be one dude, it might obviously be the other. I think Anthony Simons, not for whatever reason, I think Anthony Simons is a little more polarizing, probably because he's been around longer and people get tired of a familiar face in some ways. But like, it's one of those two dudes, and if it's not, it might be Deni, and if it's not, it might be DeAndre Ayton. But what I was thinking about is what I find more interesting is like, who is the player that's maybe not in the starting lineup that could take a leap and would just like completely change the trajectory of this team? The obvious one is Scoot, right? He was drafted 3rd overall. And if he is like, And, last year at Media Day, the GM of the team was saying he's not a typical 19-year-old, like he's this really special player. And if Scoot Henderson is not your typical now 20-year-old and is a really special player in year 2, like if he takes a massive leap, the whole thing changes, right? The whole thing changes. Anthony Simons is gone. If Scoot Henderson proves that he's a franchise player, which he was very clearly drafted to be, don't get it twisted. He was drafted to be, and after one season, maybe like the realistic ceiling has changed, but like the Blazers like need for him to be that hasn't really shifted that much. Whether they think he can be, I think maybe has shifted, but like he was drafted to be the dude. And if he makes that leap, he's the biggest swing player on the roster. Obviously, Shaedon Sharpe is right there with him. You drafted out of basically directly out of high school. Didn't play college basketball, so he preserve his draft stock, so he could be 7th overall in the pick in the draft. It worked, but like. Those guys are the obvious ones. Sharpe, I'm not including in this pick because I think he's sort of like would be a starter, quote unquote. Scoot Henderson probably going to start when the season starts, so he's probably not in this pick. He's probably like in my own rules excluded from this. So who like in the back half of the roster, if they were to take a leap, would be like would if they were to like pop and really hit, who would change the trajectory of this franchise? I think it's Chris Murray. I think Chris Murray, I don't think he's the biggest swing player on the roster. One, I don't think he's going to play night one. Like I think he's out of the rotation, and I think he's further enough out of the rotation that he's like even with injuries to Rob Williams and Shaedon Sharpe, I don't think Chris Murray plays on night one. Like I think Jabari Walker's just straight up ahead of him. But I think Murray has enough of a versatile skill set in theory, right? Because he's struggled on offense. He's a bad offensive player so far after one season. But he has enough versatility that if all of a sudden he is a 38% 3-point shooter and he can still dribble a little bit of his size and he still has the defensive versatility he does, all of a sudden you have like a starting, interesting another wing. You found that. And I'm not saying that I think that's very likely of Chris Murray. I'm probably lower on Chris Murray than most, but like to me, if I just look at like what is like the player that if they were to like pop, who's the biggest swing player that like changes the trajectory of this team like aggressively? It could be Tumani, although I don't know that Tumani has like, he doesn't have the ball handling passing skills that Chris Murray theoretically does. Same thing with Jabari Walker. I don't think that his like, if all of his skills were to hit, he's more than a role player. He can really rebound in the league. He plays hard. He's fun to root for. But like we haven't seen the sort of ball handling and I guess he has pretty similar shooting struggles. And if he shot a little bit better, he would be, again, he's like a spacer. Murray has like the size and that skill set to like. And some of this is maybe like he has a twin brother named Keegan Murray, who I think like if he were to hit, has like, outside chance to be not this season, but like in his career, outside chance to make an all-star team type of skills. And if Murray were to make that leap, right, and say like, I think coming in, I was describing him as what if he's 80% of Keegan Murray? 80% of Keegan Murray would be freaking franchise changing for the Blazers. If they had a starting level 6'8" wing who could pass a little bit, defend multiple positions, and could really shoot it completely changes the trajectory of this team. I think Ryan Rupert to some extent, although like, I'm not sure what Rupert's ceiling is because we haven't I think we've seen enough of like what Chris Murray can do, quote unquote, he would be the guy that like massively changes the path of the franchise. He hasn't done that yet, but he's the biggest swing player that's like out of the rotation right now. Rupert probably deserves a shout here. Tumani deserves a shout here. I think for sure. Jabari deserves a shout here. But to me, when you think about like what do the best players in the league do? Like what are the most impactful players do in the league? They can pass, they can dribble. So create your own shot, create shots for others, and defend multiple positions. And the best version of Chris Murray, like the very capital T theoretical version of Chris Murray, does that. Right? He has those skills. He just has to put them together. So. Well, I think like who's the best player is something that will, I don't know, visit intellectually from time to time. Policing who we think it might be is not as important as thinking about like because that's relatively flat at the top of the roster and it's like not a long-term thing, but like the Blazers as an entity are a long-term thing, right? This season they're going to be bad, and they're probably going to be bad on purpose, and they're going to be bad like very aggressively and depressingly when we get to the spring. Hopefully they're like entertaining up until that point, for all of our sakes. But just like think about this as a long-term thing. Who could pop? Who could like, oh, Chris Murray's, hey, somebody sprained their ankle, somebody's sick or whatever. Murray, you're going to play. You got 17 minutes on this random night in early December. Holy crap, you look great. You have to play. Game changer. Holy crap, from there you build on it, blah, 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 like all those things. Like, and you take the steps. Obviously, it's like usually not linear or guaranteed, that development steps, but I think like thinking about years down the line, like, if the Blazers nailed it with the 2023 draft and like it turns out that Scoot and Chris Murray are good, that's the thing that's going to save the franchise, not whether Anthony Simons is better than Deni Avdija in October. Who cares? deeply who cares? But I think swing players is something I want to pay attention to all season long. Who are the players that are changing the path? Because if it's no one, that's really important. If the answer to the question is no one, that's really important. But if you see some guys who are making steps, whether that is the obvious ones in Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson, whether that is Donovan Clingan, it's just like I don't think he's going to hit it this year, so he's not on my list. But certainly he could be, right. He's best player in 5 years, biggest steal of the draft where he's at, got votes from NBA GMs. He certainly could be, right. Chris Murray didn't show up on the NBA GM survey. But I think like the long-term view just has to be it. And them getting these draft picks right has to be the thing that saves them, because otherwise, maybe they traded for their best player this summer, right? And he's going to prove them all wrong. And then at some point, Chauncey Billups would be like, I was kind of weird about saying like, I would never say that Deni Avdija was the Blazers' best player. And he'll say like, I was wrong because he's very clearly our best player, because obviously he could be. Look at the roster. Think about who's good and who isn't. He obviously could be. Okay, that's going to do it for today's show. More shows the rest of the week is what we do. 5 days a week, wherever you get podcasts, and also on YouTube. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.